Hey, what is up everybody? I am Steve Jackson. Today I wanted to share with you my tips at being able to play bar chords clearly and easily. So if you are a newer guitar player, this is definitely a place where newer guitar players struggle. And in my experience, it's probably the number one thing that newer guitar players hate doing is playing bar chords. And what usually happens, of course, is that you learn to play some regular open chords. And then when you get to a song where maybe you run across a B minor chord or a full F bar chord, you pretty much throw your hands in the air and say, I can't do this. What I've always heard as a teacher, students say to me, is that bar chords are hard for me. And I always point out to them, it's not just hard for you, it's hard, period. If you're a guitar player and you haven't done it before, you're holding your hand in a position that's kind of awkward and unusual, especially if you've never done it before. So of course it's going to be a struggle at first. But let me start off by saying, if you stick with it for a couple weeks, at most a couple months, you're gonna get it, it's gonna work, you're gonna be able to play all those songs that include bar chords. So let me show you what strategies have worked for my students in being able to conquer these bar chords. Also, I wanted to let you know I'm gonna include a little cheat sheet for bar chords down in the description below. Now I'm gonna start with something that sounds so basic, but is so important. If you're not doing this right, nothing's gonna work. So the first thing I want you to do is just kind of sit in front of a mirror when you try this and just look at your posture. A lot of people, when they're trying to do bar chords, they start doing funny things with their elbows. They start bringing their elbow way out or way in. So either of those things is going to totally screw up everything else you're doing. So make sure your arm is just relaxed. You're not putting any unneeded tension in your elbow or shoulder. Everything's just straight up, good posture, just relaxed. Nothing funky going on with your elbow. So that's number one. Here's another thing I want to say that might be slightly controversial to some guitar players, but I'm going to say it anyway. I don't think there's one right way to do bar chords. I really don't. If you look at a lot of pro guitar players, you're going to notice that some of them do it differently than others, and it's fine because it works for them. But I will say there are definitely ways you don't want to do it, and I'm going to address some of those right now. So the first mistake that I see a lot of people doing is when they go to play their bar chord, their thumb is going to be in an awkward position. Now, I definitely don't think that there is just one correct way to hold a guitar in order to play bar chords, but there's definitely things that are going to help and certain things that are going to make it so much harder. So the number one thing that I've noticed that people mess up on is this. When they go to grip the guitar, they put their thumb in an awkward place, and this, if you're doing this mistake, nothing's going to work, I promise you. So after your posture is good, check your thumb positioning. So what I mean is, if you're holding a bar chord, right? So here's a bar chord. If I take my hand away, if my thumb is somewhat in line with my pointer finger, now it doesn't have to be exact. Of course, like I said, it can vary from person to person, and you want to experiment and see what's good. But if you start getting really far away from your pointer finger, like your thumb's like this, which I see a lot of people do at first, that's not going to work well. It's going to be really a strain on your hand, and everything you do is going to be difficult. So I would recommend starting by trying to have your thumb kind of in line with your pointer finger back here. So you don't need to get too rigid with this. It's not important that it's exactly in line with it. It might be better if it's moved slightly one way or another, but basically you want it pretty close to in line with your pointer finger. Now here's the next thing people screw up with their thumb. They might have their thumb way too high up on the neck like this. So if I start off with my thumb way up here, I don't have giant hands. So when I do this, when I move my thumb up, everything else kind of collapses. And I can't reiterate this enough, there isn't one correct spot for your thumb. It depends, right? It depends on how big your hand is, on the size of guitar you're using, all of those things matter. So what you need to do is find the right spot for your hand and for your guitar. So the way that you do that is you kind of experiment around a little bit. Move your thumb around, like I said, kind of within that range where it's basically behind your pointer finger. And it's somewhat back here on the neck, if you can see that. If you had really big hands, you can get away with your thumb being much higher and it can still work. All right, now that we got our posture pretty good and we got our thumb in a good position, the next thing we want to do, again, it might seem so obvious, but people mess this up a lot. But remember, the closer you are to the fret, the easier it is to make those strings ring out clearly. The more that you back off and you start getting in the middle of the fret, the more you have to push down and the harder it is. So what I'd say you want to do at this point is go ahead and play each string one by one and go down and give it a listen. Okay, so I'll show you now. The most common thing that happens that I've seen at this point is something like this. So if you heard that, what was happening is every string was ringing out, but not this B string. In my experience, that is the most common thing that happens when you're first learning this, and I'll show you why. So if you look at the way that this finger is shaped here, right where that bigger knuckle is, this middle knuckle, that middle knuckle wants to bend a little bit, right? And that is exactly where that B string is hitting your finger. Say this is the B string here. And if this knuckle is bent like this, you can imagine how the high E string is going to work because it's getting pressure here. But right where this knuckle bends, and that's where the B string hits it, it's going to sound all muted there. So we need to make sure that this knuckle is a little bit flatter. So what I tell people is to kind of make sure you're almost pushing down with that knuckle. So if you can imagine this, so this knuckle's getting really flat here, and now it's going to make more contact with that B string, and it's going to ring out better. Now some guitar teachers will have you do an exercise where you might try just to bar all the way across with one finger. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I will point out it's not really necessary because there's almost never a time where you're actually doing that in a song. Because when you're doing a bar chord, really, most of the time you just need to get the low E string, the high E string, and then that B string with your pointer finger, and then everything else is being covered with these other fingers anyways. So just remember that all you really have to do is get contact with the low E string, the high E string, and then that pesky B string, and make sure this knuckle is flat enough that it's going to let you push down that B string. Here are some tips. So number one, like I said, I like this exercise where you play the strings one by one, because oftentimes you will find that some of the strings aren't working. And so you can adjust and you can kind of move your fingers around slightly. You can slightly adjust your thumb position to get that grip so it works just right. But don't get too caught up on that. If it doesn't work, if one of the strings isn't working, don't feel like, okay, you're not getting anywhere. You're gonna do it wrong probably 100 or 1,000 times before you start doing it right. So we're gonna play the chord one by one, and what I want you to do is release. Just literally let go and go right back, okay? And do it again. And then let go, do it again. And I want you to do that process for like 60 seconds, maybe 90 seconds. And you can do that several times a day. If some of the notes aren't working as you're doing it, don't worry about it. Just keep doing it over and over and over, and you will get it. The next exercise you should be trying is switching strings, because as we know, some bar chords very often are like this, where you are playing all 6 strings. But a lot of times we're playing bar chords where we're playing 5 strings, right? Where everything is moved down 1 string. So a great exercise is playing this bar chord, the 6-string version, and then shifting down 1 string and doing it there. And going back and forth, right? So go 6-string version, release, 5-string version, and repeat. So if that's making sense and everything's working good for you, let's do one last exercise that's gonna kind of allow you to play these bar chords all over the whole neck. What we're gonna do is we're gonna start on the 1st fret, 6-string version of this bar chord. So that's just a regular F bar chord. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna move down a string. So we're shifting down, and we're also gonna move up a fret, right? So we're starting here. We're moving up 1 fret and switching over to the next set of strings. So we're doing 5 strings, right? And then we're gonna move up a fret again and move back to the 6-string version. move up one more fret back to the 5-string version. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm shifting strings back and forth, and I'm moving up a fret every time. So stick with it, you will get it. And hey, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and do let me know in the comments down below what other tutorials you'd like to see.